Hello, this is Scott. I'm back, and this month, in alignment with the scope and sequence established by PSJA's Department of Instructional Coaching, our PD is on Classroom Talk. As always, please sign your school's sign-in sheet to record your attendance at this webinar, and I'll pick up the sign-in sheets when I come by your school next week or the week after. Since our session today is on Classroom Talk, let's start with a Classroom Talk opportunity. So turn to a partner and discuss this question. Drawing from your reading of this month's newsletter, what is Classroom Talk? What do we mean by Classroom Talk? Now, the person with more years of teaching experience goes first, so I'll wait a few seconds while you figure out which of you that is. Okay, you ready? Each of you speaks for 30 seconds, and the first speaker may begin. Thank you. Now the second speaker can add to or modify what the first speaker has just said. You may begin. Thank you very much. Let me have your attention again. So here's what we want to get out of our time together today. The goals for this webinar on Classroom Talk are for you to know what we mean by Classroom Talk, to understand the power of Classroom Talk in getting students to learn, and that's what we're all about, and to be able to choose and use Classroom Talk strategies in your classroom. You saw this document in this month's newsletter. It comes to us from PSJA's Department of Instructional Coaching, and it's called Classroom Talking Stems. The document suggests talking stems for 7 different classroom talk objectives. It's too small to read like this, so we'll take a closer look at it piece by piece in a few moments. Before we do, let's look back at what we've talked about together before. In last month's webinar and in the live PD, we said that the person doing the talking is the person doing the learning. It's just really critical to get our students talking about the content if we really want them to internalize it. Another thing we talked about in last month's PD was the student's attention span, and we agreed that it's pretty short. But we also said that it's possible to reset the attention span by creating a state of mind change. Like when students are listening to you lecture and then you ask them to turn and talk to each other, that's a state change and it resets their attention span. Now, some of you may have had this experience. Some teachers report that their students just don't know what to say. Well, that's because too often we give students a prompt like this: talk to your partner about the Civil War. Students have no clue how to begin that conversation. If we want our students to benefit from classroom talk, we need to give them a clear structure. So let's use the talking stems from PSJA's Department of Instructional Coaching That's the document we saw a moment ago, along with Bloom's taxonomy to help us structure classroom talk in each of our classrooms. I'm going to show you a series of slides that break up the document on classroom talking stems into its 7 different parts. So I'll pause briefly on each slide to give you time to read the exemplar questions and prompts and talking stems. Let's get started. First, Bloom's lowest level, knowledge. If you want your students to rehearse their knowledge, ask questions like this. I'll pause for a moment to let you read the examples and to ask you to think of at least one knowledge level question for the lesson you're teaching today. That seems like a long pause, but it's only 10 seconds. Let's move on to the second level of Bloom's, comprehension. If you want your students to explain what they know, ask questions like this. Again, I'll pause for a moment to let you read the examples and to think of at least one comprehension level question for the lesson you're teaching today. By now, you may be thinking, Scott, what happened to the document from the Department of Instructional Coaching with those talking stems? Well, all of those talking stems are higher order. So as we get into the higher order realm of Bloom's taxonomy, we can finally begin to use the talking stems from that document. Here's the first one, making connections. When you ask students to make connections in their learning, what you're asking them to do is to apply and to analyze. Those are higher order Bloom's skills. So what you need to do as a teacher is to formulate questions or prompts that require the students to use the sentence stems you see here when they're talking to each other. I'll pause and let you look through these and think about using those in your own classroom. Just to be clear, these obviously aren't questions. Instead, these are the words that your students will use to answer the question. So you'll have to pose the questions in a way that requires them to use these sentence stems as the beginning of the responses that they give to each other. Let's look at another one. Summarizing and synthesizing. This set of classroom talking stems is at Bloom's level of synthesis. That's in the higher order. And let's be honest, summarization is the skill that our students struggle with the most on standardized tests, starting way back in 3rd grade and all the way through graduation. So again, you need to ask questions in a way that requires the students to use these sentence stems when they're responding to each other. Let me give you a moment to read through them. The next set of talking stems is about inferring. When you ask students to make inferences, that's another synthesis activity. And it's another testing skill that our students struggle with. I'll give you a moment to read the examples here. Visualizing is another synthesis activity. The students use words to paint a visual picture in their own minds and in their classroom mates' minds too. So read the exemplar stems here. Determining importance. When students decide what's important and what's not important, that's an evaluation strategy. An evaluation is Bloom's highest level. Read these example talking stems. And finally, expressing an opinion also requires the students to make an evaluation. Again, Bloom's highest order of thinking. Read the talking stems here. Now, the gold standard for classroom talk is when students talk to each other. I mean, instead of talking to the teacher, they talk to each other and they build on each other's comments. These extender talking stems help students to respond to each other and to keep the discourse moving. So it's time for us to participate in another turn and talk ourselves. Back to your partners, and here's the question. After seeing today's video, explain to each other the value of classroom talk. We'll start again with the first speaker from last time, again 30 seconds each, and again, I'll tell you when it's time for the second speaker to begin. So first speaker, the question is, explain the value of classroom talk. You may begin. Thank you. And now, second speaker, talk more about the value of classroom talk. You may begin. Thank you very much. Well, if talking is learning, you'll want to keep your students talking on topic during class by structuring opportunities for classroom talk at least every 10 minutes. And you'll want to craft your questions and your prompts to achieve specific learning goals, like making inferences and summarizing, explaining, and evaluating. We'll talk more about this during our live PD. Speaking of our face-to-face PD, you'll find the schedule of the PD sessions in this month's newsletter. When we get together, please bring your lesson plans to the session. Well, thanks for watching. Please complete this survey by entering the URL in the web browser of your phone, tablet, laptop, or computer before you leave the room. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.